Welcome to today's episode of the podcast where we discuss the most recent installments of a different series every show. It is Friday, April 10th, National Siblings Day, which is actually quite relevant to the show we're discussing, The Handmaid's Testament.
Do you do you say that because Elizabeth Moss is presented in both?
Elizabeth Moss did make a surprise appearance in episode 1 and 3 in
Yeah,
the show. So that The
she's in
Handmaid's
it. She's in it
Tale.
actually more than she is in the Testament's book, which came out in 2019.
That's kind of what I'm getting at here. There's such a connection. It feels like the music is the same, the outfits are the same, the relationships between Canada and the US are the same.
Bruce Miller is also the creator of The Handmaid's Tale. He created this. These are the only two shows he's ever created.
Right.
So,
And like The Handmaid's Tale, everybody knows.
yeah.
It's Hulu's House of Cards. It was so popular when it first came out.
Oh,
Like
very
before
much.
that, Hulu had some original content. I remember The Path with Aaron,
A-
whatever his face,
Aaron Paul.
Aaron Paul. But like that wasn't a big hit. This like hit the maps, and then suddenly it felt like the political pressure of the world added to it because you had the Me Too movement, which happened like 6 months after it came out.
Yeah,
And then you had
2017.
Trump starting his first term. And then you had the speculation that Roe versus Wade in the Supreme Court was going to get overturned because you had all these conservative
Yes.
justices being appointed. And so, like, let's just jump into our discussion, I guess. We're going to talk about Handmaid's Tale lore. We'll talk about where the series kicks off, the Testaments kicks off, the premiere episodes, Precious Flower, Perfect Teeth, Daisy, the new cast, predictions that I may have had from these first 3 episodes, the current reception, and then finally my rating.
Sounds good.
All right.
So, when talking about the Handmaid's lore, I think it's probably most important to talk about the power hierarchy of the original show, right? The Iliad's founding and kind of structure and what happened.
True. I compare it to The Walking Dead.
The Walking Dead?
Yes. How do you not? Because if you remember with The Walking Dead, what happens in every season when they make some sort of modern reference? It's always capped to when?
Usually 2010.
Correct. It's like when the apocalypse occurred. And that's sort of the same here. Back in 2014, that's when this ultra religious group, the Sons of Jacob, took over the US in a coup and they killed the president, they killed the Congress, they killed the Supreme Court, and then they immediately suspended the US Constitution, put in a totalitarian patriarchal theocracy, and renamed the country Gilead. Not to be confused with Gillyweed from Harry Potter. But what I'm trying to say is like, you don't hear very much about technology post 2014. You hardly ever, especially in Gilead, ever see like a smartphone or anything. They went back to like weaving and making everything like the honey from the bees and stuff, and it's all organic. It's like an Amish lifestyle. In Canada, it also feels like because of that slowdown in the technological like breakthroughs,
Yeah.
that they are also stuck at a certain time. So much so that when we're watching some of the teenage mentality through Daisy's character in the 3rd episode of the Testaments, it's kind of confusing to try to place where she is as a kid because she does not represent what I think of when I see Gen Z or Gen Alpha represented today. Like,
Right.
it just seems like everything stopped in 2014. So that's where, like, even the references. In fact, there was one specific reference that I was mad at in this TV show because it actually dated the thing
It was what it
for
was
something that
after.
was created in the US, and we'll talk about that. But yeah, so anything else you want to discuss about just the lore?
It reminds me of a kind of 1984. I feel like, Big Brother, that whole entire idea, authoritarianism. Also, I think that it's polar opposite in terms of presentation, but I think you can make the connection between this show and also the movie Salo. Now, everything that happens in Salo is far darker than anything that happens in the Testaments, but both deal with kind of a dystopia or, just like kind of the idea of power.
And you say Salo, and I say Silo, because Silo's the same deal where it's like you jump into a world where everybody's standard for living is so different that you immediately adapt into it. And that was very similar to The Handmaid's Tale when you saw what Offred or June's world had become at the start of that, where like wives were, or these people who could have babies, children of men style, because the world is running out of people who are or women that can actually give birth. Like they're then stuck in these families where the command commanders impregnate them and then raise those kids as their own. It's a murky tale, but it's also a very murky timeline because I can't tell you, even having watched a couple seasons of The Handmaid's Tale, where it really began or ended. I just know it's like the late 2010s and the early 2020s.
Right, and I also wanted to talk about kind of the dip in quality that The Handmaid's Tale had,
Right.
because I know that every single, like, critical review on Rotten Tomatoes always had a tomato. I think the lowest tomato was, like, 69%, but let me read you season 1 to 6 of the audience score: 90, 83, 58, 41, 24, and 43. I know you can't talk about the
It went up
last.
there at the end.
Yeah, it did. They must have done something, but the last 2 seasons you can't really talk about. But when we did our worst of 2021, it took your number 1 spot after you saw just the first couple episodes of season 4. What were some of the problems that The Handmaid's Tale had?
Well, like I said at the very get go, this was such a popular series, right? That
Yes.
it was supposed to be a mini series.
Mhm.
And had it been, it might be one of the top like series of the 2010s.
The book's considered, like, in 1985 was considered a huge success.
It's almost
Yeah.
like when people get mad that something like The Queen's Gambit, they were like, this is such a popular miniseries, let's make a second season. And then they realized they just couldn't get the crew
Right.
together. That I kind of wish happened with The Handmaid's Tale because they just started extending the material as best they could. And I don't like really fault them for that until Offred's storyline just gets so repetitive.
People were talking about how she had massive plot armor and how she was still able to survive despite all the, like, attacks that she had.
Absolutely. She should have had her tongue ripped out. She should have had been like no eyes. They torture people for like the tiniest stuff and she gets away with a lot of things. But like I'll say something that'll probably get fans of the Testaments a little bit mad, but you don't have to watch anything other than season 1 to understand the full like start of the Testaments because that's where you're introduced to June, to Aunt Lydia, and just the basic story of The Handmaid's
I
Tale.
don't know
And
if
that's
that would get
all
p
you
I
need.
don't know if the fans would necessarily get mad about that. I think Bruce Miller, again, the creator of this, basically said as much
Good,
when
because
doing
I
so.
just can't imagine too many other shows. I remember when we did the Outlander podcast and people were furious,
Yeah.
furious that we didn't watch the entire Outlander series to watch the prequel series. That's how, like, much in love they are with that
Right.
content. This, maybe not as much, but yeah, the Testaments, we start off with Agnes, who attends Aunt Lydia's elite school for future wives in Gilead, where girls are trained to be obedient spouses for powerful men. And despite everybody under the sun knowing that Agnes is actually June's daughter, Hannah, Agnes has been raised by one of Gilead's elite houses, indoctrinated with the spirit of the state, and hopes to one day become fertile so she can aid the cause.
Right. In this, in the book, it's set 15 years after the events in The Handmaid's Tale.
Which makes no
Here.
sense in what's going on here because you see Agnes is like past toddlerdom,
Yeah.
even in like the first like couple seasons of The Handmaid's Tale. And the whole point of June's character in The Handmaid's Tale, she's constantly trying to save her kids. First Agnes, and then she has a baby. I think early on in season 2, she was pregnant in season 1, and then she's trying to save that one as well.
And I think, yeah, this is supposed to take place. Elizabeth Moss and Bruce Miller kind of didn't have a specific amount of years, but it's supposed to be 3 to 5 years in the TV show that takes place after The Handmaid's Tale.
Right. So this is where it's murky because it's like there's supposed to be an age difference between Agnes and her sister.
Oh,
And
yes.
and yet it seems like, and we'll talk about this a little bit later because it does fall into the siblings relationship, but like that seems a little cloudy. And then
Big
also just
difference. Yeah.
how old Agnes is supposed to be. Because I would think if she's 15 years old, then that means that, and this is only like 4 years after The Handmaid's Tale, she was 11 at the last season of The
So
Handmaid's
you
Tale.
are already kind of hitting nail on the head with something. So in the book, Daisy is about 10 years younger than Agnes. Agnes isn't even really a student, I don't think, in the book. She's an aunt who goes by Aunt Victoria. But here, I think that they made it a similar age because they
They
wanted
changed a
to.
lot of things from
Yeah.
the book. I also know that Aunt Lydia is the one who's the point of view from the
Yes.
book, and that's weird because the Aunt Lydia I remember was a hard ass. She could be one of the biggest villains, but then at very rare times she would come out and actually come out. She would fight for the rights of the handmaids, especially when like the commanders were overstepping or doing something really cruel. Like she still would punish them and not be afraid to take out an eye, but she also didn't want to see them, like all her work that she'd invested into these girls, to be completely destroyed. That's why when I see her as being the principal of this school, it makes a lot of sense. What didn't make sense was that she hadn't aged a day. And I was like, well, that's pretty
They
crazy.
changed her occupation in the book, it was a judge, but here, yeah, The Handmaid's Tale changed her to being a teacher, and then, like you said, she's the principal. From the way you are describing her, she sounds a lot like, the teacher, I guess, in Battle Royale, if you've ever seen that Japanese film, because he's supposed to be very evil as well, but there's a little bit of a heart to him.
Right. Like, there's a lot of evil villain characters who go by their own code, and that is what makes them almost like more believable, and also where people can support them in a weird way.
Right.
But yeah, so Agnes is sort of the Rapunzel of this household because technically she's part of the elite. Like, because she was adopted by one of the commander's families and she was raised by this kind of nice wife, but then was replaced by a evil stepmother. She has an evil stepmother now. She's like stuck in this world where she's like playing with a dollhouse all the time, and she has to go to this girls' academy where they teach them weaving and painting and culinary and music. And then there's field trip hangings and assemblies where they cheer torture. It just goes
That
from one
was
end to the other
Yeah, that was
real
so
quick.
strange because at first, it almost reminded me of kind of like nuns trying to teach a nunnery, but then, yeah, you have Agnes screaming how she wants to chop the guy's
Gladiator
arm off.
style.
Yeah.
Right. So she's part of a group of young elites that are plums. So they could get their period or they could not. Because again, there's this big like breakdown in society where women are no longer having children. So a lot of them aren't fertile. And I assume
is
many
it
aren't getting their period. And that's why a lot of them are much older than you would assume to see. Like for children, I guess in nowadays, I think girls get their period sometime between 12 to 15. And these girls are definitely on the upper end of that age.
is that why
Yes.
they're wearing purple because they're called plums?
Yes. So like the purple outfits are the plum outfits. Before that they were pinks, and then once they get their period they become greens.
Mm.
And they talk a lot about menstruation in this show. There's a lot of sex talk and menstruation talk, and definitely like a young woman's journey, and so like it is kind of focused on that for a little bit of time.
Is it too much young adult dystopian as opposed to kind of the adult-oriented Handmaid's Tale was, or do you think that they
Yeah,
still
it
keep
is
a
like
similar
teen
tone?
Handmaid's Tale a little bit. And that's why I think like Handmaid's Tale could easily take this back over if Elizabeth Moss chose to. If she wanted to, you could like adult this back up. And there are definitely a lot of parallels between Agnes's journey and Offred's, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But do you recall the show American Born Chinese?
Yeah, that was the Disney Plus show,
Do
right?
you remember what happens in the beginning episode? I think there was this kid, he wants to be popular, he is a little nerdy, but, like, he's trying to go about his day, he's trying to impress this girl, and then
Doesn't
the
he get
principal calls him in to the office and says, "Hey, can you help by kinda tutoring/having slash having this foreign exchange student, shadow you?"
Right, I remember that it was based off the comic book.
I
Yeah.
remember in actual high school, I did see a couple kids that happened to them, where like my friend had a foreign exchange student who was like tailing them around for a good month. And they didn't speak Japanese or like they didn't speak English that well, but they spoke Japanese. So that was part of the reason why
And
they
I
were
assume
kicked.
you're talking about Daisy and Agnes, that's kinda what Agnes has to
Yeah,
go through,
so
right?
Agnes feels like she's being punished because she gets called to Aunt Lydia's office, which is immediately not a good thing. You don't want to separate yourself. You just kind of want to maintain with the crowd, and you can't even become best friends with anybody because the other aunts at the school are kind of like the guardians, and they're going to just get you in trouble. There's
Right.
Aunt Esty, Aunt Gabbana, and then Aunt Vidala, who Aunt Vidala I think is the second highest aunt in the school if you don't count Aunt Lydia. And the funny thing about her is that I feel like just by the cut shots, she may have a turn. She may be the good aunt. She may
Mm.
be the good Nazi. There's always one
There's
represented in like a show where they try to flip sides and change the order of
But I know
things.
what you mean when you say strict, because there's even that scene where one of them says socialize, and they can't even talk before they're given the permission to.
Right. And also, like, Agnes has friends who have recently gotten their period. And I think her name's like Becca or something. And she's watching Becca go through this journey where she's about to get married off to some like fat commander dude and forced to have his baby. And Becca's hating it. But Agnes is like, no, you don't realize it's going to be great because she's like fully drank the Kool-Aid. But so the first episode, you have Agnes. She's introduced to Daisy. Now, she doesn't like the pearls. Daisy is a pearl, which means that she comes from Canada. Canada is still like liberal as far as like they have not bought into the Gilead religious movement. They are definitely they house a lot of resistance to the movement, even the fighters, this Mayday amount of people. And so when they're able to I guess, break through and bring in some of these pearls, like it's a real win for Gilead, and
Mhm.
that's why they're trying to promote it. And I assume that's why the pearls immediately go to this elite school rather than where I would assume most of the other girls end up, which
Oh,
is like one of the lower end
so yeah, no, so it's
places.
kind of like a power play
Yes,
almost.
because
Yeah.
there's no other reason why I would think Daisy would be able to cross all the like, we see her past and that was only a few months earlier where she was just on the street of Canada, like, hanging out, and there's no other reason why she would be able to be promoted all the way to Gilead's, like, top school unless they were trying to really show off the fact that they pulled in some Canadians.
Right.
That's my guess. She reminds me a lot of, like, Ethel from Shameless season 1 or 2, who was, like, an
Oh, wow,
Amish.
you're to okay,
Doesn't she
yeah.
look a little bit like her back in the
I
day?
can see it definitely, yeah.
Then she has this turn. So it becomes fairly obvious fairly quickly that despite Daisy pretending to be really into the movement, that she, when she first sees this guy get his hand cut off because he was apparently like touching himself.
Self-pleasuring, I think they say.
Yes, and she can't handle the fact that of the bloodshed. She runs away and she pulls Ellie from The Last of Us, and she just starts swearing like crazy.
Well, she throws up first, and then
Yeah,
she
and she's like, "What
like
the fuck?" Like, that's straight up a line just from The Last of Us.
and that's when I was like, I haven't really seen The Handmaid's Tale, so I didn't know how hard stricken they were. I was like, is she going to get in trouble not just for swearing, but for throwing up? Because like if she got in trouble for that, but no, it just seemed like one of the
Had she
teachers.
been a plum, I
Yeah,
think she would have, but I think that the aunt that saw it realized, not the swearing, but saw her get sick, realized this was like her first
go
viewing
around.
of such a mess. And so that's where also Agnes kind of shows that she's not 100% going to just tattletale, you know?
Hmm.
She doesn't get the Pearl in trouble or Daisy in trouble. And so she's like, you know what? We'll let bygones be bygones. We get two reveals at the end. One is that Agnes actually gets her period. And the second is that we see where Daisy's from and that she actually has a connection with June when Elizabeth Moss shows up.
They do the camera turnaround, and yeah,
Yeah,
she's there at the very end.
episode 2 begins. It's called Perfect Teeth. And it makes a lot of sense if you think about it because Agnes has now become a woman in the eyes of the Gilead people. And so she's got to go through all these rituals, these initiations, and the ramifications of her getting her period. The reward of that is that A, her evil stepmom gives her a menstruation education. Fun. Then she gets felt up by the dentist. Also
Oh,
super fun, hence perfect teeth. Then she has to kneel in front of her dad, where a bunch of old dudes are also like having a meeting with him. And she announces that she's been blessed to have a bait or that she's going to be able to give birth. And then finally, she's going to have to be woken up in the middle of the night to perform a baptism in front of all her schoolmates.
there were so many weird scenes. Did it remind you at all? And you might not even remember the movie Level 16 that kind of
Yes,
was
it does. It
similar
reminds me a lot of that.
with like yeah, teenage girls
Just the
and depending.
totalitarian of school.
Right, exactly, and the hierarchy system.
But like I've said all the bad stuff, she does get to ring a bell as many times as she wants. She gets to go into the school and she rings that bell and she doesn't have to tell anybody about it. They all know what that bell means. It's funny though, because the way that she does it, she scares Daisy into thinking that she's about to tattletale on her for the previous day's work,
Right, because
which
yeah.
ends up causing Daisy to over overanalyze it and go directly to one of the aunts and admit to her fault before she could get in trouble because she knows that it would be worse. But
Right.
Agnes was never even thinking about her. And
She
so
just
what
misread the
ends up
signals.
happening is they stick Daisy in this struggle session. Look that up if you need to, but that's like a old public humiliation style thing where everybody just yells at you or worse, and they call her a dirty girl, which I assume because these are young women. Like if it had been Handmaid's Tale, it would have been slut and they would have been throwing things at her at the
It's
same
a
time.
lot like Game of Thrones Cersei season 5 finale.
Right. The shame, it
Yeah.
brings upon them until she rats out Agnes as having heard her and being somewhat complicit to her having swore the previous day. So they both end up having to wash their mouth out with soap. That's kind of the end of Perfect Teeth.
It was weird though, because they didn't just have like a soap bar. It was like the teacher put in soap from a dispenser,
Right. And
right?
then they explain where they got the soap because, like, Amish style, they don't have the same sort of industrial complex that they do currently in the world. Like, because everything's broken down, they make their soap with animal fat and charcoal. And so that stuff, or soot or something. And so it tastes
Yeah.
disgusting. Yeah, and they're just rinsing their mouths out with it. The third episode comes along, and honestly, with the first two, I don't mind them. I'm kind of entertained. I'm curious where the story's going. I think that like it feels more like a movie to me than a television show so far. They're not that long. In fact, I think both the first two episodes, if you take out the credits, are probably like a long pilot,
I would say,
a
yeah,
little
like
longer
maybe
than an hour.
hour, yeah, hour 10, hour
Yeah,
15.
and so the third episode's Daisy, and we know that it's gonna be her backstory, and so I'm excited about that. I have the highest hopes for this one. It's 51 minutes, but those 51 minutes, they drag. This
Didn't
boils
like it.
down to Spy Kids slash like or her backstory is basically Spy Kids slash series of unfortunate events, then The Terminator, then Star Wars. So
Yeah, wow.
yeah, now that sounds interesting, right?
Yeah.
But it basically is that Daisy's parents are Canadian spies, and then they worked for Mayday and they got murdered and she found out that she was adopted.
Well,
That that was basically everything that happens.
they were also, like, really okay with her having sex,
Right.
right?
Well, they want to show Daisy to be the complete opposite of what she appears as Pearl. One thing that sorry, I keep on calling her Pearl, but as herself when she becomes one of the Pearl
Right.
girls. So what happens though is that once her parents are murdered, she has to grapple with that, and that's when June shows up at the hospital, and it's like, oh, cool, Elizabeth Moss is back, and she literally has like almost the Terminator line. She's like, "Come with me if you want to live," because there's another set of Gilead secret agents out there trying
Right.
to kidnap her, and we don't know why yet. June brings her to this safe house, and this is where the episode loses me because you've seen this episode.
Yes.
Had she just brought her straight to the diner and explained things, that would have
That
been
would've
it.
been it. Yeah, but I think Elizabeth Moss wanted more screen time.
Maybe that, but then put her in the next episode. I don't care. But like this was so strange because I feel like they kept on giving the excuse that Daisy was high. So she needed time to kind of process the fact that her mom died and then go hang out with her boyfriend again and then return to June.
Yeah.
But like all of that was so pointless and there was so much fake angst. At one point, she was just like constantly asking June to give her phone back. And she used the excuse, I want to arrange my parents' funeral or like get in touch with like the mortuary or something like that. And they just died.
Yeah.
There's slabs on the table, and there's no way that there's going to be any mortuary open at that point to make that phone call.
Also, who cares about the boyfriend? Why'd she have to go and, like, sleep with him on that same day?
Justin?
Yeah, everything just seems so
Justice for
rushed.
Justin. Well, Justin needed to get laid before he could leave the series. And like, yeah, she just takes some money from him and then she returns to June and she's like, I've listened to what you had to say and now tell me more. And so June tells her the story about how Daisy is, in fact, a famous baby who was put up for adoption and adopted by this nice Canadian family to escape Gilead. And she heavily implies that she is her mom, but she never comes out and flat out says it. But we as an audience are just like, oh, yeah, so that would make Agnes and Daisy step siblings.
Yeah.
This is the baby that June had with the guard in the first season of The Handmaid's
But did
Tale.
you like that twist at the very
I
end?
mean, I feel like most people watching the series probably knew it. It did take me to the third episode before it clicked because I just hadn't been caught up on my Handmaid's lore. In fact, I don't even really recall. I didn't recall until too late that like she had gotten pregnant from that guy. I
Right.
remember her falling in love with him and the doctor trying to give her a baby too, and the amount of times that Joseph Fiennes like tried to rape her or whatever. But like, yeah, it took a while. And then finally that clicked and I was like, all right, there's that happening. We get the future storyline where there's the field trip attack and Mayday goes after the plum bus.
I did like that scene. I did like the, kind of shootout that happened
Well, then you
there.
probably like the later season of Handmaid's Tale because that's all about the rebellion and how I think June goes and joins the Boston squad or whatever. At least that's where I think I left off. The final twist is, I think, the biggest one of the series. Now we know that Agnes and Daisy
Daisy.
are destined to find out about each other, and it really is a question whether or not Daisy, how fast she turns, because obviously she's going to side with her sister eventually. But right now we just have to see. We also find out that the guard that that Agnes likes
Mhm.
is part of the resistance as well.
It seemed like every single guy in this TV series always was, like, having longing eyes towards at least one girl that was inside the,
This is a female gaze series. If you think about it. No, it
I
is. It's shot from the female gaze. They talk about things like the girls are all obsessed with the guys having body hair at one point, and then like yeah, you were talking about how when Daisy is looking for some way to grieve her parents, she instantly seeks out not to talk to him. Like we skip over the talking scenes
yeah.
with Justin, and it's really just about him being a body for her to like calm herself.
It also reminds me kind of the twist of them being sisters. Completely different shows, but the Venture Bros had a season 6 twist that was very, very close to that, except that was brothers as opposed to sisters.
Nice.
But
Let's talk about the cast. So you've
yes.
got Chase Infinity, who
Yep.
is headlining the show, and it's a bit audacious if you think about her career right now because it is kind of infinite in the momentum that it's going.
Oh,
First, she starts off in a small role in the Jake Gyllenhaal series, right? And
presumed
presumed
innocent
innocent,
as Rusty's
but that
daughter.
role she ends the series being very, very important as a character.
Yep.
And then this next thing you see her in is what?
One battle after another.
Freaking the daughter in that.
What did you think of her role in that?
I thought that she was great in that.
The thing is that, Presumed Innocent, it came out as they were filming One Battle After Another, and then, she got the role months prior to One Battle After Another coming out, but it was actually Presumed Innocent that made the showrunner, Bruce Miller, want to hire her, want
Right,
her to
and then
read for
she
the
comes to
role.
this, and it's just like boom, boom, boom. Like she's in 5 years, 10 years, like she's gonna be a really, really big
Yeah,
deal.
these are all her only 3
I know.
projects right now, but it's like, yeah,
It's like
come
the lady who did Shogun and then like the Godzilla show and
yeah.
then like some other giant one, all 3 within 1
Yeah,
year.
if you look back in, like, 10 years, she's just gonna have a giant filmography.
You have Commander Mackenzie, who plays her dad, and he's from For All Mankind. I immediately saw him as Larry from For All
Mhm.
Mankind, and it's funny because he plays a gay character there, and in this, he's the complete opposite because if he's one of the commanders, he's going to be one of the dudes who's like enforcing killing all the gays and stuff.
Are you talking about Nate Cordry? Is that who you mean?
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
so.
Yeah.
Maybe I think he does look like a Cordry.
No,
So
I think he's the brother of Rob
and
Corddry.
Rob Corddry, I think we'll talk about in The Audacity. I think he's going to be in that show. And then Penny's husband, even though we didn't really talk about this, but their field trip that gets delayed in the 3rd episode, they do end up going to meet this girl who used to be a plum, but then got her period, then got married.
Mhm.
And so they're able to have this reunion. All the plums are. And her husband comes in and he looks like Joseph Fiennes'
I think
character.
that was on
Yes, on
purpose.
purpose.
It wasn't him.
There were more
Yeah.
parallels in this show. The creepy doctor that Offred has to fend off in the first season of that. It's similar to the creepy dentist that we see here, falling in love with the security dude. Offred did it, and now her daughter's doing it. We see a lot of plums, we see a lot of Marthas, we see a lot of hangings, but we don't see any handmaids. So I wonder if part of the handmaid's tale is that they got rid of them or if they just aren't in their periphery like right now. I just don't they're maybe not part of the houses that Agnes has
I
seen.
didn't do too much research on the ending of The Handmaid's
I
Tale.
already said Aunt Vidala. I'm predicting that her turn is going to be towards the good. I like that they brought back the same soundtrack, the strings, the flutes. It's definitely like as soon as you start hearing that, you're like, yes, this is the same universe. And then they randomly have contemporary songs, which I know a lot of shows do, but they do it well here. And then I would compare it to The Lives of Others, which is another
Yes.
police state type movie where you either join the system or you get killed by that system. And then the one big complaint I had was that at one point, Agnes in the first episode asked one of the housemaids, not one of the handmaids, but one of the housemaids, people who are just preparing food,
Right.
how she met her husband. And she said, well, back then I met him. There were these sites called Tinder and Bumble.
Bumble.
And the
Yeah.
Bumble thing immediately raised a flag in my head because I knew Bumble came out so much after Twitter. In fact, or not Twitter,
Tinder.
Tinder. And I knew that like someone who made Bumble came from Tinder. And so I was like, what are the chances that that happened after the President's Day
After,
massacre?
2014,
And it
right?
did.
Yeah.
It happened well after. It happened December 2014 was when Whitney Wolf Herd launched it from America.
And I
So
don't think it
unless you're
got yeah.
saying he ran up to Canada to quickly launch his app in the middle of like this huge war.
Not to mention it becoming big, like
Yeah,
as big
and then
as it
it
did.
still took off as Bumble. I don't know why they didn't just have someone be like, "Hey guys, maybe that reference we just stick with the Tinder
Yeah,
one."
just Tinder, it worked.
Yes.
I know that Daisy, this is actually her first TV role. She's only been in 2 other films, both of which have a 96% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Nice.
And then, I know that the director of the first 3 episodes and the finale, I'm not sure if he's directing the whole season, but he directed the pilot of The Sandman, directed half of The Smoke with Taron Egerton, which we talked about on the Smoke podcast. Also, the first 3 seasons, did a couple episodes of The Handmaid's Tale, and is even slated to direct the first 3 episodes of the Peaky Blinders sequel series that is coming out.
Yeah.
So they definitely have talent behind the camera.
Up until the 3rd episode, I was okay with how the show was pacing itself. Again, I do wanna point out that, like, Daisy and, Agnes should not be the same age, and yet they seem like they're
Right.
the same
Again, that was
age.
something that for some reason they changed from the book to the TV show, because
Well,
the
no,
book
it
was
seems
correct
like
about.
from the TV show to the TV show that it shouldn't be
Right,
as close as it is.
right.
Especially since Daisy has had sex.
And it's strange
So
because Margaret Atwood, I know when she was writing the Testaments in 2019, was talking like talked with the TV show producers about like not wanting to like ruin the continuities. Like that's the reason why she
right.
wrote it the way she
It
did.
just is so awkward to watch when you know that Agnes has just gotten her period now, and she's like at least 3 years older than Daisy, and yet Daisy we saw in a 6 month, or I hope it was like only 6 months past thing where she's already having sex with her boyfriend.
Yeah.
Like, so like that means whatever.
And
I don't even care what that means.
I found it
That's
really
weird.
I found it funny because The Handmaid's Tale book came out in 1985 with The Testaments coming out in 2019. The last season of The Handmaid's Tale came out in 2025, and then not even a year later, we're coming out with The Testaments. It
What would you, because you only watched it like sort of from the side. I watched the full thing like
Right.
you can completely. So what would you give it?
I would probably give it like a 6.5 out of 10.
I'm
Again,
gonna go a little lower. I'm gonna give it just a straight 5 out of 10. Nothing particularly highlights this series for me. Had episode 3 been a little bit better, I would have given it a better review.
okay, so it actually has positive reviews. But the places that have been positive have been like extremely positive. It has an 87% on Rotten Tomatoes, but Variety gave it its critics pick label and called it a stunning follow-up to Hulu's dystopian The Handmaid's Tale. Meanwhile, The Independent gave it 4 out of 5 and said a cross between Bridgerton and Lord of the Flies, and called it a young adult epic for the ages. However, the AV Club gave it a C+, criticizing the slow pacing and world building that most of the people already know because they watched the original anyways.
I don't even feel like it's because it just retread, like, again, the first 2 episodes were retreading some of the stuff we knew, and I liked those. It was just that, like, I felt like it fell into the same trap that the later seasons of Handmaid's Tale did in the 3rd episode, where they could have done something very interesting with Daisy's storyline, and they kind of went with the tropes, and they kind of, like, really embellished what was kind of obvious. So, yeah, I mean, it was cool seeing Elizabeth Moss return to the role. I think she's left it. I think she's pulled a Topher Grace to a point where, like, it was just like, "Oh, I'm gonna show up for a couple episodes, and then you won't see me until, like, maybe season 2."
Yeah, because she's still deeply, deeply involved with the show. Again, she's an executive producer for it. Like she
Right, but she's also busy with, like, Imperfect Women and doing all this
yeah.
other stuff, so, I don't know. But thanks for listening. We'll see you in the next episode. Hope you enjoyed this one. Bye.
Bye.